Want to welcome everybody to today's Entrepreneurship as Education. We are joined by Danny Warshay, the Executive Director of the Nelson Center for Entrepreneurship, in conversation with Arnell Milhouse, the co-founder and CEO of CareerDevs, for a conversation on how entrepreneurship and teaching entrepreneurship can bring a new perspective to solving today's problems. So welcome everybody, and thank you.
Thank you, Avi. It's really nice to be here. I know Arnell and I are honored to have been asked. We're both doing, I just mentioned this to Tuni, we both are invited to do these kinds of sessions for groups all over the world. The other day, as I was just saying, there was an internationally focused group. We had people from Greece and Somalia and Canada and Austria and all over the world. And so I always like to say when I do something here local in Providence that it's nice to play a home game. And it's even so wonderful to look at this screen and pretty much recognize everybody on here. A couple of my colleagues, Sheila and Liz, and I would be remiss if I didn't thank a real strong mentor of mine, Barrett Hazeltine, for being here today. I'm honored that he's here. And maybe I'll even mention in passing if Arnell asks me, because we thought we would ask each other questions. My relationship with Barrett and how that relates even to probably what the heck I'm doing here today. And so I thought maybe we won't do any formal introductions. Again, we know so many of you, but maybe we'll weave in some of our backgrounds that are relevant to all of you as we talk to each other and as you ask us questions. And so Arnell, I thought I might start, if you don't mind, with what felt like that very consequential meeting under a tent at Waterfire in 2016. I was really honored by Waterfire to do what I hope all of you have an opportunity to do, and that's to light all the fires along the way in one of those little boats that goes along, and you kind of feel like royalty. You're going along in this boat and you see all the people on the side and they're all waving and cheering you on, but what most people don't know is that there's a ton of pressure on you, because if you don't actually reach the wick and light the fire, you look like a real jerk and the boat has to turn around. But I got through that and it was really fun, and I got off the boat, and who's standing there but this guy with a ton of charisma and a super amount of energy named Arnell, and he comes up to me, and Arnell, why don't you take it from there and you can talk about where that initial spark of our relationship led to.
Absolutely. And what is ironic is that just a few months later, I was actually invited to light the fires at Waterfire as well. So it's an amazing experience. It's a different way to see it, and it really helps you take it in. And you know, what's really great is that I do want to say, first of all, I do want to acknowledge Barrett Hazeltine and the representatives from CareerDevs that are here. Hi, everyone. And you know, but Waterfire, it really harkens to what Danny is talking about here. Barnaby and Peter at Waterfire, they've worked so hard to be more than just an art installation. They wanted it to become part of the fabric that connects the city of Providence and the state of Rhode Island and actually the world together. And so I remember walking into the VIP tent area at Waterfire, and everyone was saying, Arnell, you have to meet this gentleman by the name of Danny Warshay. And I said, absolutely. And so a friend of mine, Charlie Myers, rushes me over, and I felt like I was going to meet the king, right? And so I meet Danny, and he was such a humble, enthusiastic, and yet you could tell such a knowledgeable individual. And immediately his ideas was, how can we impact the city of Providence outside of the Brown bubble? How can Brown help? How can we impact the community? And so that led to an invitation for me to come up to College Hill to several of the Nelson Center events that Danny, Liz, and the rest of the team were orchestrating. And within short time, we listened. Danny, I could tell that he was doing a lot of listening, asking a lot of questions, and was able to really identify what our strengths were at CareerDevs and how they could probably merge together well with the Nelson Center. And so right off the bat, what happened was that we began bringing our students into the Nelson Center events. And then there was this natural cross-pollination between the Brown entrepreneurship students and then the CareerDevs computer science students helping to create websites and helping them in their technical endeavors. And it was something that really, first of all, it blew me away, because when we're here in this Ivy League university, and our students, who are very, very capable, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, that we were being woven into what I consider to be one of the rarest of opportunities on the planet. And it was a win-win scenario.
Maybe you could just tell us real briefly, or we'll invite some of the CareerDevs folks maybe later to chime in too, but tell us the 10-second pitch for what CareerDevs is.
CareerDevs is a 12-month computer science school where we guarantee every graduate a job as a software engineer, earning between $50,000 to $80,000 as a starting salary. And if they don't get that job, they never have to pay us a dime if they don't land it within 6 months.
And these are folks who don't necessarily have any background in computers or tech or programming, and are transitioning perhaps in their careers midway.
Absolutely. We have students that were formerly working at Trinity Repertory Theater as stage managers. We have used car salespeople. We have painters. We have DJs that are DJing in Boston that are now earning 80, 90, 100, and at the highest mark, $140,000 a year. And Danny, if I could, I want to talk about what I learned from Danny that really changed the course of CareerDevs.
Sure. So I'll tell you what, can we pause for a moment? Because maybe we'll leave that as a bit of a cliffhanger, and circle back to cover a few basics. It's the professor in me that wants to make sure that everybody's grounded.
Wonderful.
So for example, you and I had a really nice conversation at one point of, well, what is entrepreneurship? And is that something that you can teach? And it's funny, I hear that a lot, and it's a weird kind of question, not from you, but from people all over the world who say, can you teach entrepreneurship? And I thought, well, I hope the answer is yes. Otherwise, I've probably been wasting my time for the last 15 years or so. And I certainly do feel like, and I know confidently that you can teach entrepreneurship. The way we define entrepreneurship at Brown is a little bit more expansive than what you might find if we were in the context of where we had a business school determining in a more narrow way what entrepreneurship is. We define entrepreneurship, I define entrepreneurship as a structured process for problem solving without regard to the resources you currently control. That's a mouthful, and if we had a whole semester, we would unpack that. But you could think of it as a structured process. And there's three main components, and we could even talk about what those three are. And I know Arnell is a big fan of those three, and especially the first. But I say that because even your allusion to Barnaby and Peter and what people do through artistic endeavor, or what you're doing through meeting the needs of a community that might not have seen itself as capable of doing the kind of programming that all the wonderful people through CareerDevs are doing, or all the kinds of ventures that are coming out of the Nelson Center. These are all focused on meeting a specific need, addressing a problem. And needless to say, we're all on this platform right now because the world's facing a really serious problem. So there's no shortage of problems, but the first step is what you and I have both teamed up to teach at various times, what I call bottom-up research. And that may relate to, you know, where CareerDevs started and how you detected that need. Bottom-up research is this anthropological, empathetic approach that I teach, which is the first step in this process where you're finding and validating an unmet need. Pretty much, if entrepreneurship is about problem solving, you ought to start with what the problem is. And so maybe that's a good place to circle back to what you were saying about CareerDevs. What's the need that CareerDevs was looking to satisfy, and how have you done some additional bottom-up research since you've been exposed to this methodology that I teach and that we espouse, and how has that helped what CareerDevs is doing now?
Absolutely. So first of all, you know, not being a Brown University student, I graduated from Johnson Wales. Danny opened up his treasure trove of information about his view of entrepreneurship. And one of the things that I really appreciated, and Danny, I'm going to actually deflect it back to you. What do you think about the pervasive mindset that there's this entrepreneurial spirit or this prototypical entrepreneur? You see the Steve Jobs or the Bill Gates that people often imagine that they are the types of people that can become entrepreneurs.
First of all, good pivot back to me, which is a really good pedagogical approach that I learned from Barrett Hazeltine, which is, the Socratic method. You don't have to answer the questions. You just have to learn to ask good ones. Yeah, I love that question because how many people, raise your hand either virtually through Zoom or raise your hand here. How many have heard this phrase, entrepreneurial spirit? Anybody ever? Yeah, a lot of people. Everybody's heard that phrase. So I kept hearing it all over the world. And back in 2005, it was actually Barrett Hazeltine who asked me to come to Brown to teach. And I can't really say, nobody can say no to Barrett. And so before I knew it, I had said, sure, yes, I'll come teach at Brown. And then I realized, oh man, what did I just agree to? I've never taught anything, like not even Sunday school. And so I think Barrett probably had the wrong guy. And then secondly, what does it mean, teach entrepreneurship? And I started to think, and I thought, I have heard this phrase, entrepreneurial spirit, but I can't imagine, what does that even mean? And how would I teach somebody a spirit? And so then I realized, at Brown, at least, as I say, there is no engineering school and there's no business school. There's an engineering school where Barrett was teaching, where I was going to be teaching. And I realized, imagine if when we wanted to teach somebody how to build a bridge, we just said to them, go out there and teach the bridge building spirit. Just throw up a bridge, and if the bridge collapses and the cars and trucks hit the ground, then have some more spirit, be persistent, go throw up another bridge. And I thought that would, of course, be crazy. We would lose our accreditation. And yet I found that that's the way people were expecting to teach entrepreneurship, just have spirit. And I thought that can't be right. And so I thought, well, in engineering, when you teach somebody how to build a bridge, there's a structured process. There are fundamental steps of every bridge building process that relate to every bridge. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end, even though there's lots of variation in what bridges look like, how they function, their aesthetic look. And so I thought similarly, there must be a way that I could distill some fundamental principles out of my own entrepreneurship. When I went to Brown, I was a history concentrator, and I did an independent study with Barrett Hazeltine to enable me to work on a startup that we built. It was a software startup, and we eventually sold to Brown. And I eventually went to Harvard Business School, and I had a number of other startups. So I thought, well, I could distill out of my own experience some fundamental principles and maybe some of what I learned at HBS. And that's what I did. And it's this structured process similar to a bridge building process that follows some fundamental principles and is a structured approach, not a spirit. And those three elements are find and validate an unmet need, which basically means what's the problem you're looking to solve. The second step is a small scale solution, what you might call a value proposition. And then third, eventually, is how are you going to have big, long-term impact at a big scale? And I think in our exchanges, Arnell, you are a really smart student and a really good teacher, and you plucked out elements of those three steps and applied them to CareerDevs. Is that right?
Absolutely. So when I met Danny, I had, prior to starting CareerDevs, worked at a school called Launch Code. I was their lead instructor for Rhode Island. And I saw there were some problems in our curriculum. And so I had this idea. I had the solution, or so I thought, what needed to happen. And so I created a rough outline of what we wanted to do and bringing our own version to the market. And then on that fateful day, I meet Danny, and out of everything he's talking about, defining and validating unmet needs and value propositions and thinking long-term, big scale, the biggest thing that really stood out to me was his empathy. And it caused me to listen more. And I had an opportunity to to meet the CEO of eMoney, which is a company in downtown Providence, eMoney advisor. So I met the CEO there, and I immediately went into Danny Warshay mode, asking him a ton of questions and trying to draw out what their problems were, if they had any issues, and just trying to anthropologically observe what was going on in his universe. And I think he tuned into that. Actually, the two of you should meet. The two of you should meet, Danny, absolutely. And we have to make that happen, maybe through Zoom these days. But we had the opportunity. I asked him, I said, can I come into eMoney and simply watch your software engineering department, watch your managers, maybe ask a few questions? And that turned into a 4-month incubation process. They ended up taking myself and my amazing co-founder, Clifton Shawnier. We went down to Pennsylvania, went to their headquarters, spent 2 days there doing the same thing. We had notes on top of notes on top of notes, observations. And at the end of this process, Cliff and myself, we said, wow, this is going to completely change the way we're thinking about career devs. And all the while, we were making change, because Career Devs was up and running. We had our first cohort of 25 students, and we were making changes week to week to week. The more we learned from eMoney, we would say, wait, nope, we're going to implement this. And
so
at the end
there's a concept there that I want to underscore, which is the iterative nature of that second stage, where you're developing initially a small scale solution to the problem that you identified. And I underscore that because it's one of the characteristics of the process that I mentioned, a structured process for problem solving, that distinguishes entrepreneurship from, let's say, product development in a big company. Because in entrepreneurship, most of the people on this Zoom call know this, you're not going to get it perfectly right the first time. You might not get it perfectly right the 10th time. And so you have to have a tolerance for this iterative nature, which in some circles might feel like failure. Like, oh, you didn't get it perfectly right? Well, we better cancel that project. No, the nature of entrepreneurship as you're experiencing it and as you experienced it back then was, now we didn't get it quite right the first time. We missed some things that when we went back to listen and observe, like I say, anthropologically, empathetically, I love your word, empathy, you detected, and you bake that into the next iteration. And so, look, we talked about WaterFire. WaterFire today in 2020 doesn't look like it did years ago when it first started, and that's for the good. And nobody on this call, since we're all entrepreneurs, would think that's at all strange. It's the nature of how entrepreneurship needs to evolve. And so, and then I know at some point you gathered an insight, it's partly I know from our discussion about that third step, which is thinking really big. Okay, we kind of got the value proposition down. We kind of know the small scale solution to that problem we've identified. Now, how are we going to scale it for the long term? Because, and sometimes people ask, well, why does that matter? Well, it matters because if this is about solving a problem, solving it on a tiny scale doesn't really fundamentally solve it.
Correct.
Solving it on a big scale has the potential. I mean, it'd be sort of like if you found a vaccine for COVID, which we all certainly hope is going to happen soon, but it only worked on a tiny population, that wouldn't really be solving the problem. Solving it on a global scale is really what we're talking about. So at some point, I know you pivoted to the concept of scalability, and you have a model which is a little bit different now from where you had originally started.
Absolutely. We're continuing to pivot, but I like to think that we're continuing to fail and discover our failures. We're often looking for how are we failing, and we embrace and encourage that to grow. And I do want to put a bow in that last statement. We had to, before I move on to the scaling aspect of it. So after several meetings with eMoney over multiple months, they said, okay, listen, we're coming up to Rhode Island and we're going to meet with about 3 or 4 companies similar to CareerDevs. And we're going to pick one of the organizations to form a partnership with, where we're going to pay you to deliver software engineering students to us. So they came up to meet with us. We sat down with them. We were the first company that they met with. And they asked if we wanted to be first, middle, or last. We said we'd love to be the first. And when they sat down with us, there was a table with myself and Cliff and the vice president, senior vice president, and 2 senior software engineers. And then we had an empty table with 7 seats. So we gave them our presentation and they were blown away by what we were able to really reflect from their needs. And they said, wow, if you could do this, we would be over the moon. And we could say that we would go with you. And they said, how long would it take you for you to implement this? We said, well, give us a moment. And so we said, everyone, please come in. So 7 of our software engineering students came in and had a seat. And we said, okay, here's your job description. And we said, we would like your senior software engineers here to destroy them. We want them to ask them questions and try to just destroy them. And they put them on the firing squad and they tried to, and they weathered the storm and they were blown away. They said, when did you do this? And Danny, I took that idea from your Gore-Tex, no, your G-Flex, it was
G-Form, close.
G-Form, your G-Form to Dubai story.
Oh yeah.
Just speed chess, being able to, we said we were developing these students all along according to what you needed. And they took us out to dinner that night and we ended up getting we landed the contract with them, which was amazing for us. And Danny's been my cheat code. I've been taking so many things from you. I haven't even told you all the things that I've really been able to borrow from you over the years.
Well, you know, it's mutual, which is why we've loved the interaction among our different communities, because we learn something from you and from all the wonderful folks from CareerDevs who come to our events and sample the B-Lab content and cheer all the teams on at our showcases and the Brown Venture Prize. And so that maybe is a good thing to emphasize for the Venture Cafe community, which is, you know, our doors are open, just like I know Tuni would say, your doors are open. They're virtual at this point. But even now, we would welcome you to participate in our activity, in our programming. You know, I'll shamelessly promote it. Liz will probably be happy. Maybe Liz can put our website on the chat. It's entrepreneurship.brown.edu. And I hope that those of you who aren't already on it will sign up for our regular email updates, because you'll be in good company. There are sometimes when there are more what I would call community members at our Nelson events than there are students. That's sometimes, for example, in the summer. And we would welcome you all to participate. I just want to shout out this really great quote that Jody, you shared, which is, if you look the same a year from now, you're doing something wrong. Jody, I don't know if you want to emphasize that at all. Is there anything you're thinking about particularly there?
That's a quote from Dennis Littke. He starts every school year with that, so that we know we have the autonomy to look at things different. And like an entrepreneur, try to look at what we're doing and how we can make it better.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly consistent with that iterative nature of what we're talking about, and this tolerance for failure that, in fact, it's not even tolerance. As you're implying, if you're not changing, then there is something wrong. You get stale. And that's the challenge sometimes, I think, in the teaching I do. I do workshops in different places around the world beyond academic contexts. I've done a bunch here locally for CVS and Delta Dental and Hinckley Allen, and then others like for the US Embassy in Bahrain and China, and I was just in Egypt fairly recently. And the challenge with, if you're working with a government agency or a big nonprofit or a big company, is sometimes that they don't have that part of the process internally where they have embracing failure the way that Arnell is talking about. And it's why I think, you know, all the people again on this call have a lot to offer big companies, even if it's not your own startup, to embed this process in their process, because otherwise they're going to be outcompeted and they're not going to be around for very much longer. You know, I think Arnell, as you have people from CareerDevs graduate and move on to the kinds of places where you're placing them, I know that part of the reason you wanted to affiliate, establish a relationship with our Nelson Center was so those students wouldn't just be techies. So they wouldn't just be, you know, really good coders, which, you know, nothing wrong with that, but you wanted them to have a more well-rounded kind of approach.
Worldview.
Yeah, so that they could have impact. And it reminds me of our emphasis at Brown. As I say, we don't have a business school. And so our point of view on defining entrepreneurship the way that I did way back when Barrett asked me to teach is really from a liberal arts perspective, that you need to be well-rounded because you can't anticipate exactly the skill set that you're going to need when you're out in the work world. And so that's why being a history concentrator like I was at Brown, turns out was a really good background for entrepreneurship. And I'm a real big proponent of liberal arts as a background for just about anything. And I think that was your mindset, that was your approach when you wanted to weave into the CareerDevs curriculum some of our curriculum from our Center for Entrepreneurship. Is that right?
100%. And if I could have one of our students that I see here today, who's actually become now a teacher at CareerDevs, Milo. Milo, have you ever been to any of the events at Brown University?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've gone to pitch night quite a few times, and you know, it's been a huge aspect of kind of directing where we want ourselves to go and understanding the kind of roles that entrepreneurs and we can have within kind of startup companies. So it's been a huge asset and a huge resource.
And how about the conversations that you've had with the students at Brown and staff and professors?
Yeah, so actually it was a huge part of us attending pitch night was really being able to mix it up with some of the folks that were doing pitches that night. And I think it's really educative for CareerDevs students to understand that tech has applications that aren't just, you know, we work a lot with fintech companies, but it's that has applications beyond that. You know, if we're talking about like business.
What is this woman's name?
Say again?
Nope, go on.
I think so.
Okay, great. Sorry. Yeah, you know, business to consumer things, understanding like logistics. We worked, there were a couple folks last time that were doing like new food products. And, you know, for someone, I have a background in the restaurant industry amongst other things. And that was a huge thing. Thinking like, okay, yeah, there's digital transformation aspects to just doing business to consumer products. And that's something that I think that often if you're thinking about coding, you're sort of thinking about like, okay, it's head down work, it's numbers heavy, but there's huge other avenues that folks can take that really follow their passions too. And I think for CareerDev students to see that is a huge moment for them in their education and following direction that we want ourselves to go.
Well, Milo, we've really appreciated having you and your colleagues with us. I'm noting the time, and I want to be respectful of our, at some point, having to shut off what it seems to me a really great conversation. I want to acknowledge Dee Dee, you had posted a really good question here. I thought I would just open it up to you. You could tell us a little bit perhaps about what's happening at URI. And similarly, I hope you have felt that the door has been open to you and to URI students and colleagues at our Nelson Center. And maybe you could just live ask the question so that we could give you a little bit of a shout out here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Danny. You've always been super open to everybody at URI in terms of you know, opening the doors to your events that you're running through the Nelson Center and more. So we have really started to ramp up our curriculum at URI, certainly in the College of Business and in the College of Engineering around entrepreneurship. And we've been, have started up minors and all sorts of certificates and minors and major in entrepreneurship in those two colleges. And we've really seen a lot of interest from all of so there are 8 colleges at URI and students from all over, from College of Environment and Life Sciences and of course, engineering and health sciences and pharmacy. They're all taking these classes. So we find that that's been like some really great progress that URI has made in the last couple of years. We've also recently opened the Launch Lab in the library and a makerspace in the library. So we're trying to bring groups together across the different colleges at URI. Some of this is that's all co-curricular kinds of programming, the work that we're doing around the Launch Lab. But yeah, so, I know there's some similarities going on at Brown, and I'm really interested to see sort of what's driving what. I guess what was my question, how do curricular and co-curricular entrepreneurship education at Brown coexist? So are you thinking of one as, I know it's an ecosystem, everything helps everything else along, probably, but I'm interested in your perspective on, are students coming to you who have taken classes, is coming to you at the Nelson Center who have, taken formal classes as part of some major or minor that they're doing, or, and is that helpful that they've done that ahead of time?
Yes, I think a great question, and I really appreciate the partnership that we have in that URI feels welcome to come to our events and participate in just about anything we do. The scaffolding that we use to identify the three buckets, as you know, as probably others on the call have heard, are these three components: curricular, co-curricular, and venture support. So there's an unprecedented number of courses that, the lineup looks overwhelming compared to when Barrett asked me to teach back in 2005. And that's a good thing across the curriculum, not in a narrowly defined area, well beyond engineering. Again, no business schools. So that's from American Studies and economics and music and visual arts, biology. We launched a new course this semester in gender studies called Gender and Enterprise. We launched a new course in urban studies on entrepreneurship and real estate. And we're hiring, again, an unprecedented number of adjunct faculty, visiting faculty, lecturers, and endowed professors to do the hard, rigorous teaching that you would expect at a place like URI or Brown or any of the really good institutions around here. So there's a very strong academic underpinning to what we do. I remember when I met Jonathan Nelson for the first time about this, he said, "I'm not giving you $25 million to start a club." And I knew what he meant, and he didn't have to emphasize that. And we were totally on the same page, and I think he's thrilled with the emphasis. What he meant is this is a university, so there should be strong research-based underpinning, not just what Danny Warshay happens to think entrepreneurship is. And so there is. At the same time, there's open field running with an unprecedented number of workshops and speakers and events and all sorts of ways to learn outside the classroom that invite people from every corner of campus to at least sample what we might mean by entrepreneurship. And then the third component, I like to say, we're not only motivating students to learn entrepreneurship, we're empowering them to do it. And so what Milo described as the pitch night for the showcase is the capstone event of our summer B-Lab accelerator. We have increasing amounts of grant funding. We have an explosion of mentors from our alumni network and others locally. A shout out for Dan Holmander at Adler, Pollock, and Sheehan, who so generously comes to mentor our students in issues related to patent law and IP. We have a student-run venture fund called Van Wickle Ventures, which invests equity investments in Brown-spawned ventures. And we have a Brown Venture Prize competition which I know Milo and others of you have seen, where we award $50,000. We just did this scrambling. Liz and Abby and Jonas did an amazing job getting that online within a couple days' notice of translating our biggest event of the year into something online. And so those three buckets, curricular, co-curricular, and venture support, are the scaffolding, as I say, for all the ways, not just curricular and co-curricular, that students and others, as we've been saying, can benefit from those kinds of resources.
Absolutely. Danny, I'd like to touch upon Toonie's, well, so yeah, round of applause, because first of all, the Nelson Center has a staggering amount of, by design, cross-pollinizing activities that create, the great, that ensures that the ventures and the students output something greater than the sum of their whole. So really, really amazing, amazing work there. And I hope that that really helps answers your questions, Dee Dee. But I know that Toonie wanted us to think a little bit about what's to come in the future post COVID-19, and how should we think about solving problems or validating and finding unmet needs in that. And that will double back to what you asked me, is that one of the things that Danny also promotes is something called landscape metaphor thinking. When you step back and you sit down and you envision your market or your target market, the problems that you're trying to solve, in the way that they're going to be solved 40 years from now, 50 years from now. And it really takes some time. And for me, it's been a meditative process where I spend a lot of times in meditation and just thinking, just like the thinker. I take that pose and I'll just marinate in it. And it's amazing when you slow the world down and you really channel that empathy and you have these conversations and you run the film, you become enlightened, almost like the Svengali, the mountaintop, guru. And
well, I remember that landscape exercise had impact on career devs.
Yes.
And it is something that I do think could be useful as we're confronting this horrible COVID-19 problem, because we're so understandably enmeshed in our own immediate needs focus. I have a class starting in a half an hour. How am I going to make sure I get that through? We're doing venture pitches to venture capitalists. How are they going to go? And so one of the things this landscape exercise does is free us of all the near-term executional worries and puts us really like 40 years into the future, where nobody can claim any real insight with a crystal ball to know what that's going to look like. And then rather than incrementally growing from this point forward, instead, imagine yourself in the year 2055 and inventing backwards. And I don't know whether that's the secret to curing our current ills, but I do know that, at least in terms of all the other implications of COVID, we're not going to transition Brown to being a really first-rate online university if we think of it encumbered by our vision of its current approach. Instead, I think we have to free ourselves of those current dynamics and imagine ourselves way off into the future. Liz will, I don't think Sheila participated in this, but Liz will remember that we did that for the Nelson Center a few years ago when we were first getting started, and said, let's not imagine what we're going to be in 2020. Let's imagine what we're going to be in 2040. And actually, one of the things we said was, it's likely that people aren't going to be coming to Providence, Rhode Island and spending $250,000 to be a Brown student in a physical location. There's going to be some other method, some other teaching, some other remote approach. None of us could have imagined needing that mindset, just a couple of years into the future. But I will say, I do think that exercise helped us to prepare for today, even though it was driven by a very different kind of problem.
Absolutely. And
we
so
have about 1 more minute. Is that right, Toonie?
Okay.
Or Avi?
If we need to go a couple more minutes, it's
45 minutes to an hour. So
okay, good. So Arnell, should we see if other people have additional questions? Or
yes, we do. I would like to first recognize my business partner, my partner in crime, Clifton. If you could wave your hands right there. And what we're doing would not be possible if it weren't really for having him in the fold. So thanks, Cliff. Yeah.
So there's a question from, who's AW? I don't see AW on my first screen. See, this is the challenge of asking a question, you get cold called, and that's my process of teaching. AW, you're right here.
AW.
Maybe we'll unmute you. You want to tell us who you are and ask what I think is a really good question there? And maybe we'll even open it up to other people if they want to answer it, because I don't want to speak for my students. Okay, well, the mic doesn't work. AW, where are you from, and what group are you affiliated with? Maybe you could just type it. we'll pick that up along the way. So the question is, what's the most vital recurring lesson you hope your students take away from your entrepreneurship class? I bet, Arnell, you could guess what I would say. I suspect Liz would guess what I would say. I see Fran Slutsky, a colleague here. We could all probably coalesce around a similar answer. Arnell, you want to take a stab at guessing what you've been in my workshops. You also now teach. What do you think that most, the vital recurring lesson is? The first part of the process, probably. Because if it doesn't start well there, what are you building? So what do you think people would say?
You have to find and validate an unmet need. And you have to be empathetic to do that. And you have to listen. So
I would agree with that. I mean, Liz, maybe you have an insight in that too. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I feel like it's not a feeling, it's why the process starts there. If you don't do that first part well, no matter how well you develop a short-term solution or try to scale something, it's not going to be built on a firm foundation. But if you do that first part well and you really understand the problem, not what you think the problem is, but what you empathetically have, I love that word that Tuni just posted, validate, and do that anthropologically, then the rest of the process flows very naturally. Liz, I see you unmuted yourself. Did you want to contribute?
Yeah, no, I think something that I've learned just from my time working with everyone at the Nelson Center is just because it's a problem to you doesn't mean it's a problem for others. And that just reinforces the validating the unmet need. Because I think a lot of our students, they're afraid of bottom-up research. It is scary to, interview people and ask open-ended questions to gather more information about the problem you're trying to solve. But I think we try to give you resources to lean into that fear and really get after it.
That's such a great reminder that if all we're doing is looking in the mirror, that's not a valid form of bottom-up research or validation. It might be a problem that you're experiencing, but it doesn't mean that anybody else cares about it. And, I often find it, again, I'm technically a professor in engineering. I don't know anything about engineering, as Barrett knows. But, if you're surrounded by people who spend their time inventing new technologies, they often feel like those technologies are really what matter. But sometimes they're a technology in search of a market, or they're a solution in search of a problem. And that's really dangerous. Cheryl asked a good question about, Cheryl, do you want to ask it live so everybody hears it? And maybe you could describe the nuance associated with what you're asking. It's about the arts.
Sure. So yeah, when you talk about, I think what I found is a lot of people, in order to create their business idea, they have to create some type of structured business plan. And they don't understand, and it's called a contract or whatever it is that they're going to present. They don't understand that that's just, it's like a piece of clay. And as they progress in their careers and in their attempts to bring that to life, there's gonna be failures and there's gonna be change that's needed, and that's moldable. And you need to change that, and that's the way you succeed. And I think, having an art background, that we get so, and for the history of what has happened in education, so much of the arts has been removed, that if they can focus on having some element, whether it's journaling or painting or drafting, and keep that a part of their plan, that when these things fail and when they hit these obstacles, they don't quit, but they learn to go around it. And through, whether it's meditation, they need to, re-engage with themselves so that it helps bring whatever they're trying to do to life.
I think it's really well said. Is anybody on this call from RISD?
Me, just me.
Oh, just you. Okay. So I can see that being your priority, and it's a really important one for us too. We welcome RISD students into our classes. It's seamless for RISD students to take classes for credit at Brown. And I know Arnell's community has engagement there. In fact, we both were together in a workshop at RISD. I see my colleague, Fran Slutsky, on the call, and Fran has a really expert background in design and maybe has a point of view on this too. Yeah, I like to say there's no right or wrong answer in art or art history. It's not about finding the right answer. It's about having an open approach to finding perhaps a portfolio of right answers. Fran, I see you unmuted yourself. Do you want to share anything in response to Cheryl's question?
Well, I think that, you know, it kind of goes back to the human-centered design and the merging of entrepreneurship and human-centered design, which is the way that I teach the class that you teach, Danny. We have our different, slightly different flavors. So I come at it with a human-centered design background and or design thinking, as it's called. And so, you know, I think that that framing works quite well for me in teaching entrepreneurship. It gives some structure to the class, and it also allows for the creativity in you know, iterating and really coming up with, you know, this whole process of bringing ideas to life and pivoting with them. And so that's sort of my take on the structure of teaching entrepreneurship, if that answers the question.
Yeah, and I think you're right. We have different flavors, and that's a really important concept. And we really value your point of view that you bring and your expertise. If we could pivot to, can we just, Arnell, there's a good question for you on the chat. Do you see it? It's from Claudia. Or maybe Claudia, if you want.
Yes. Yeah. So how about Claudia, you ask a question for everyone to hear. Hello.
Sorry, I was unmuting myself. So I work with a lot of minority communities, and I noticed that many of them do not relate to the word entrepreneur. Not even entrepreneurial spirit, but on the word entrepreneur, they don't see themselves as entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, and many of these beliefs may be passed on to young people, as you may have experienced, Arnell. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to know, what are the strategies, how you take people out of that mindset, you know, to kind of reprogram their mind and believe, you know, I do have the ability to co-create. I do have all of this amazing potential that you see in them, but they don't see it in themselves. So I'm looking for these strategies, any guidance, so I can have more impact in the work that I do.
Absolutely. So there are a couple of things that we do by design and intentionally. We talk a lot about emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and we get them outside of their current worldview. We take these trips to Brown, and we say, you're not allowed to congregate together. You have to go out and you have to speak to at least 5 other students from Brown or professors or anyone else from the Brown University community. And they are, the first time they do this, their knees are knocking, the sweat is pouring. But we let them know that you have earned this right because you have been working hard at this and you know what you're doing. And they return and the glowing looks on their faces when they're talking. They're like, wow, you know, I had this conversation and they were asking me my opinion. And it's amazing when you hear that. We say, yeah, you know why? Because you're human and anyone has the ability to contribute and impact the world. It's interesting. We did an event about 5 or 6 months ago. We held a CareerDevs Women in Tech Night, and the entire leadership panel for that group were all women of color. And I remember one of the ladies, she said, and they were going to be the panelists. They were asking the questions, and we brought all these industry experts. We teamed up with Providence Geeks to do this downtown at AS220. And they were so nervous. They said, well, Arnell, are you going to be there with us on stage? I said, no, you have this, you can do this. In fact, I was going to be in New York speaking, and Cliff was there in Providence, but it's giving agency to them by putting them in positions to succeed, but also positions to fail. It's a balance, right? And knowing that failure isn't the be all end all, it's the beginning. And so, yes, you want to really give people agency and help them discover themselves. So put them in positions. And that's
One
that's
of
my
the,
answer for that.
if I could
Thank you.
add one more thing, and then we'll transition to our last question from Elliot about differences, if any, between for-profit and nonprofit. Claudia, I really appreciate your question, and it's absolutely a priority for us at the Nelson Center to have our door as wide open as it can be, and to encourage anybody on our campus from any background, discipline,
Yes.
ethnicity, race, gender, to understand that entrepreneurship is a structured process for problem solving that doesn't fit everybody in the same way. And in fact, the bedrock of team formation that we teach is the most important quality of any team is diversity. And there's really good academic research, back to what we were saying before, that I've written about in a book I'm about to publish. And I'm really proud of that in terms of the Nelson Center's priority. And we don't have it perfect, but we're learning from each other. And I feel like, you know, we at least have an open mind to that being such a critical part of entrepreneurship at its core. So I really appreciate that question. Elliot asked a question before that we'll wrap up with, which is, are there any differences in the way we address entrepreneurship, this process, for something you might call social entrepreneurship versus regular entrepreneurship? And the way we frame it at the Nelson Center, it's not necessarily the way everybody does, is really the answer is no. We don't distinguish, we don't label. You know, we work with the Center for Brain Science, and we don't call that neuro-entrepreneurship. In our B-Lab Summer Accelerator, it's not like we have the nonprofit people on the 3rd floor and the for-profit people on the capitalists on the 4th floor. Everybody's melded together, and it addresses the same question we were just talking about with Claudia, that diversity of all kinds is the best format for everybody to learn. And the third part of that process that we described before, that Arnell and I were espousing, is deliberately not something we call a business model. We call it a sustainability model, because it can take different forms. It can be in a big company, it can be in a big agency, it can be in a nonprofit, it can be a social venture, it can be social enterprise, it can be in a research lab. The method is build a model that can have sustainability in whatever format, long-term and at scale. And so I think that is one of the things that distinguishes our approach to entrepreneurship at Brown. Again, originally started by Barrett, who I'm so glad is on this call, and why I think it resonates with groups all across the Rhode Island community. We have, just like we have with Arnell, we have a really strong relationship with another group called Practico Innovation, Walter Callender, Don Stanford, and that's a relationship that we value. And maybe that's a good place to end, to say that we really appreciate Venture Cafe's role in leading entrepreneurship throughout all the communities in Rhode Island. And then I'll turn it over to Arnell to see if he has any parting words as well.
Again, thank you for being such an amazing mentor and partner, and Barrett Hazeltine for really getting the ball rolling as well. For everyone for joining and coming out, especially the career dev students. I see your faces, and my business partner, Cliff. That's it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you
everyone.
again all for joining us, and everyone have a great day. Take care. Who's on the Wheaties box?
Oh, hold on, I'll show you. That's I'm not surprised that you don't recognize who's on it, but that's a much younger me. That was when I did some work at General Mills during business school, and one of the perks was that they put you on a Wheaties box. I think the scariest thing is that I'm wearing a tie. And that may be the last time I ever wore a tie.
Yes, exactly.